Good morning, Luther community. My name is Colleen Wilkinson.
And I am Mr. Brian Belouse, and we are excited to have this opportunity to discuss some of our experiences in dealing with the mental challenges related to COVID-19, and to offer you some ideas to help you better cope with the challenges you might be facing. While many of the challenges related to COVID-19 lockdown are common to a lot of us, maybe a sense of frustration or loneliness, loss, maybe disorientation and worry, there are many that are actually unique to our individual situations. So, for example, I'm locked down with my wife and we don't have any kids or any pets. So it's just us and our plants. Um, and even though we love each other very much, it's easy to get annoyed with each other when we're stuck at home day after day after day. It reminds me of a tweet I read the other day where someone said, um, me and my wife are playing a game called Why Do You Do It That Way? And there are no winners. Um, so, Mrs. Wilkinson, what's been a particular challenge for you during this time?
Well, I value all my roles and responsibilities, but I do find it difficult to balance working at home with being a mom day after day. And I sometimes feel frustrated with having to constantly divide my attention between home and work duties. Mr. Blouse, how do you deal with the troubling emotions that you've described?
Well, I think one of the key starting points for dealing with troubling emotions is acknowledging that all feelings are valid, regardless of whether we like those feelings or not. So, frustration, loneliness, loss, disorientation, worry, those are as real to us as relief or gratitude or happiness. Um, we aren't bad people because we have bad feelings. Rather, we're people experiencing real emotions. So, in fact, we need to have negative emotions to be healthy people. Um, a healthy body's appropriate response is actually to feel sadness when we're supposed to feel sadness, like if we experience loss, or to feel worried when the future is unpredictable. Those things are actually helpful for us in a lot of ways. So not experiencing these feelings would actually be concerning. Of course, if such feelings last too long or are too intense, they can cause us bigger problems. So we have to be careful with them. So a starting point for us is to avoid blaming ourselves for feeling the so-called bad emotions. Um, what we want to do is to seek to understand and then accept them. And a really kind of powerful method to help us do this is the practice of labeling emotions. So labeling or naming our emotions is the first way that we can actually gain some perspective and control over them. A lot of people I've been talking to during social isolation and distancing have discussed having bad days, days where you feel grumpy and easily irritated and annoyed and all of that. A useful way to cope on such days would be to try to give names to those bad or negative emotions. So, for example, instead of just saying, I'm having a bad day, saying something like, I actually feel confused about this whole situation, or I'm frustrated, or I'm disappointed about that event that's been canceled. Calling the emotion what it is can help remind us that what we're experiencing is not only reasonable, but it's temporary. So once we do that, we've got a chance to move past that feeling.
So, how do you move past troubling emotions?
Well, an important piece to this is to acknowledge that the emotion is transitory, that it's going to change. So I actually learned this from a student that I was working with one time, and she referred to emotions as guests. And I think that's a helpful metaphor. So guests aren't here to stay, but they're here for now. So it's up to us to figure out how best to deal with them while they are here. If we can recognize this, that they are guests, then we can facilitate an emotional shift by implementing healthy habits or routines. So, for example, once I recognize that I feel a particular emotion, say frustration, I can try something to help me move past that feeling. Um, for example, I could say something like, I'm feeling very frustrated this morning. I think I need some time alone, so I'm going to go for a walk. And then the walk helps me move past the frustration to a better headspace. Um, but naming the feeling allows the walk to act more powerfully as an antidote to the feeling. So we kind of need to name it and then do something about it. Um, that helps to remind me that I'm not captive to an uncomfortable emotion, but I actually have agency to do something to help myself. So, Mrs. Wilkinson, what about you? How do you move past or deal with difficult emotions?
Well, when I'm feeling anxious or overwhelmed, I acknowledge my feelings and then I shift my focus to aspects of my situation that I can control. At the start of the COVID lockdown, I found myself spending a lot of time reading news about the pandemic. And I quickly realized that focusing on the uncertainty of the unfolding situation was making me feel really anxious and overwhelmed. There are so many aspects of the worldwide COVID response that we have no control over. And focusing primarily on what we can't control leads to unhelpful thinking patterns, such as predicting the worst possibilities. However, shifting our focus to what we can control in this situation is an empowering alternative. Instead of feeling helpless and lost, we can feel purposeful and productive in our activities. So, to illustrate this point, I'd like to introduce the concept of locus of control. Individuals with a strong internal locus of control believe that they have control over their own outcomes, that they can shape their own fate through their efforts. And people who favor an external locus of control tend to attribute their outcomes to external forces. So, a good example to explain this distinction is to consider how two different students might approach a difficult exam. Student A believes that if they prepare well, then they're capable of success, while student B believes that studying won't make a difference because they'll probably fail regardless of their efforts. Maybe they believe the exam's too difficult or there isn't enough time to prepare. So their resignation to failure becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. Awareness of our own locus of control is important because when we believe that our actions can help us to achieve our goals, we're far more likely to act with purpose and intention. Making progress in pursuit of our goals is satisfying and empowering. And in this unprecedented situation, shifting our focus to the aspects of life that we can control isn't necessarily an antidote to uncertainty, but it does improve our confidence and satisfaction with our day-to-day life. So in my case, when I shifted my attention away from pandemic news to focus on preparing for online teaching, I felt more calm and energized and really empowered to take control over my daily affairs. Mr. Balaus, what aspects of life do you think that we can focus on to improve our mental health?
Well, there are numerous resources available that we can look at. Basically, every website you go on these days has tips and tricks for how to improve mental health. But one of my favorite ways a thing to focus on that can help improve our mental health is to think about it through what we would call the TLCs. And I've talked about these in chapel before. TLCs are therapeutic lifestyle choices, the healthy habits and routines that give us a solid foundation for good mental health. These are kind of equivalent to hygiene, but for our mental health. And we can work on these things while still abiding by lockdown restrictions. So we're going to go through a few of these just to give you some ideas of what maybe you could be doing. So the first one we can talk about is physical wellness. So healthy nutrition, exercise, sleep routines, All of these are vital for supporting mental wellness. These are the things that allow our bodies to thrive or not thrive, depending on how we engage them. In that sense, everything we do is physical, for better or for worse. So watching Netflix for 4 hours is physical, but not in a good way. It is a challenge, but there are a lot of ways to enhance physical wellness while we're in lockdown. So in my house, we've made a chart actually where we try to write down or keep track of any physical activities we're doing. So going for a run or a walk or doing a 10-minute ab workout or having a picnic and throwing a frisbee, all of these things count as physical achievements for us. What about you, Mrs. Wilkinson? How are you staying in shape during lockdown?
Well, I do try to take regular brain breaks to allow my body to move in between periods of sedentary work. So I walk up and down stairs, do a few sets of push-ups, or do a few minutes of Pilates. A quick brain break really helps me to refresh my mind for the next block of work that I undertake. For further information, everyone can check out the Luther Wellness Google Classroom and Instagram pages. Mr. Casper and Ms. Woods have posted a ton of great ideas to support physical wellness during COVID-19.
Yeah. A second TLC for good mental health is the idea of social connection. Now, as we all know, this has been challenging with the physical distancing restrictions, but it's not impossible. So many of us have turned to voice and video calls in addition to other electronic communication to stay connected. This is great. I know for me, I've been able to stay in touch with family from all over the world on Zoom. But I'd also like to suggest that we don't rely exclusively on electronic interactions to feed our social needs. There are actually many ways we can carry on social connection, but it just takes a bit more creativity. So I'll give you an example. One thing my wife and I have been trying to do is to engage our friends and family in more creative ways. So one weekend, what we did was we set up a scavenger hunt around town for some of our friends. So we mapped out coordinates of the treasures and sent the map to our friends who then had to go search around town for them, kind of like a geocaching sort of thing. And we had a ton of fun creating this and facilitating safe social interactions. Plus, it was something fun to do. So like a lot of people, our social interactions have been limited, and this has been hard to cope with, but all the more reason to be purposeful and work at creative ways to be social. Our next TLC that's extremely important is spending time outdoors. So of course, while practicing appropriate physical distancing. Nature can act as a sponge for us. It soaks up some of our extra emotions. It acts like an emotional regulator, similar to how an adult might soothe a small child. Mother Nature can soothe us. It's also a great opportunity for mindful reflection. One thing that we've tried to do in our house is to pack up whatever we would normally eat for supper on occasion, not every night. And instead of eating it in front of a screen, say, we have a spontaneous picnic in a park. It helps relieve some of the stresses of the day and helps relax us before settling down for the evening. So, Mrs. Wilkinson, has nature helped you to cope at all with social isolation?
Absolutely. Yeah, I have young children, so daily outdoor physical activity is part of our routine. We go outside at least twice a day, regardless of the weather. We bike ride, we throw the frisbee or football around the park, we run up and down the hills, we jump on the trampoline together. Whatever we're doing outside, we're usually smiling and laughing while we do it. It's a wonderful family bonding time. The time outside seems to restore energy and really improve our focus. And with that, I'd just like to take a moment to reflect on the silver lining of the current pandemic situation. Everyone I've spoken with lately, students and faculty alike, seems to have experienced certain benefits despite the hardships of the physical distancing. Some examples include spending more time with loved ones, learning more practical life skills, a more manageable work schedule, and more time to work on creative projects. My silver lining is that I get to spend far more time with my husband and children than I would otherwise. And now that all of our formal activities are on hold, we have more time to pursue leisure activities together. And that brings us to another important therapeutic lifestyle choice, and that is relaxation and leisure activities. We tend sometimes to forget about the importance of relaxation and leisure activities in maintaining good mental health. Sometimes we fall into such a busy routine that we don't make enough time for leisure activities. Since school has been closed, students have been telling me how much they miss their extracurricular activities, and they're realizing how powerfully that leisure time reduces anxiety. Leisure activities really allow us to ground ourselves in the present, which is usually a secure, comfortable state. And they distract us from worry about the past or possible future events. Activities like playing games, singing, dancing, and laughing are important antidotes to stress. They also help us to create strong, positive bonds with other people. I recently took part in an online course taught by psychology professor Steve Jordans at the University of Toronto. And he commented that it is physically impossible to be anxious and relaxed at the same time, which shows us that we can intentionally include leisure time into our schedules as a very direct and immediate way to counteract stress. In my house, we often listen to music and sing along. So the Beatles, Bob Marley, 80s hits are all favorites. Even when there's no music playing, someone's humming a tune. And the music just seems to lighten the mood. Another favorite activity that we're doing right now is family reading time. We are currently making our way through reading Tolkien's Lord of the Rings. Settling into a good novel always stimulates a lot of interesting conversations. Mr. Belaus, what is your silver lining in this situation? What enjoyable activities have you incorporated into your routine?
Well, something I've really enjoyed is being able to spend more quality time with my wife. Um, we love to cook meals together. So it's been really great to have the time to try new recipes and sit down, eat them, and just chat about life without having to rush off to some event or activity. Another silver lining for me has been having a lot more time to read for pleasure. So one of the books I recently finished reading was called Man's Search for Meaning by Viktor Frankl. And in that book, Frankl reminds us that we can find meaningful existence even in the most difficult circumstances, which brings us to our last TLC for today, finding a sense of purpose in spite of our difficult situation. So during this time when our sense of normalcy and routine has been disrupted, it's really important to define our sense of purpose. So what do I hope to achieve each day? How am I going to make that goal a reality? If there are obstacles to reaching that goal, what steps can I take to overtake them? So one way I've been able to find a bit more meaning while isolated at home is through what I would call inner work. So reading and meditation. I've been trying to wake up early, not to do work, but rather to read, reflect, and pray, a spiritual practice. So as I engage in these activities, I'm able to gain a perspective that helps me cope with the difficult parts of the day. And that all happens before the day really even begins.
As one of your Luther faculty, I can tell you that my sense of purpose is largely defined by helping students in the classroom as an English teacher, as a counselor, and as a trusted adult and support person. And Mr. Belaus and I would both like to remind you, the Luther community, that we are available to students for remote counseling services. So appointments can be made through email, and our contact information can be found on the school website, as well as the Wellness Day Google Classroom in the classwork section. There you will also find some helpful resources on nurturing resilience and strengthening coping strategies.
We would like to leave you with a final thought to ponder. The COVID-19 lockdown has changed many details about our lives, but it hasn't fundamentally changed who we are and what we value. Our Luther community is thriving despite our physical isolation. And that's pretty amazing. So please take good care of yourselves and one another, and blessings on your day. That concludes chapel.